Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 20 of The Creative Pause. I am Susan Padron, and I am here with my co-host, who I will allow to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacey Faye. It's so good to be with you today. We can't believe it's episode 20. That's very exciting. And we're very excited today as well to have Miss Wondersmith with us to help us all tap into our creative sort of magic in this time that we're all in. And we always start our episode by explaining a little bit as to why we're here and then asking you all how you're doing. So our hope with this show is that it offers you a moment each day just to have a bit of calm, a laugh, a smile, just a moment to breathe in a time that can be really difficult for so many of us. So we hope that that's what it's offering you. And we start with the question of how are we doing? You know, we want to know how you're doing out there, and encourage you to chime in on the chat, or if you're listening to the recording afterwards, to say it out loud or perhaps journal about it. And we three, Susan, myself, and Miss Wondersmith, will share a little bit about how we're doing. Because we think in this time, I mean, all the time, but particularly in this time we're in, it's important to remain human and understand that we're all going through a lot of different emotions that can be hard day to day. So hopefully sharing helps you tap into those and move through those. So I will start. Today is pretty good, actually. It's if you've watched episodes, you know I have some ups and downs, and you know, this week started out rough, but it's gotten better in the past few days. And I think it's gotten better because I've tried to stay mindful about activities that are grounding me a bit more. So yesterday I was getting outside, today I was listening to some music, and, you know, taking meals a little bit more slowly, and just trying to just sort of find ways to ground myself when I might not be feeling so great overall lately. So yeah, so my day is actually pretty good. How about you, Susan?
I'm doing pretty well. I think my energy levels are really low today, and I don't really know what that's about. I've become very aware that my mood and energies are connected very much so to the weather, and today it's like a little bit more gray and cold. So I don't know if that's just my body and my energy just wanting to kind of like go into that hibernating, curl up with a blanket kind of feeling. Um, but I decided to kind of power through those feelings and go for like a bright colored print, and you know, embrace the beauty of today, and the, you know, all of the creativity and magic that's going to be happening in this episode. So I'm choosing to feel differently, in, you know, any way that I can today, and I'm okay with that. So, Miss Wondersmith, how are you today?
Some chronic illness issues that are flaring up today. So I'm actually recording this from my awesome bed studio. um yeah, so just kind of low energy, but emotionally I'm doing pretty well. I've got some projects I've been working on that I'm really excited about, and that always helps a lot. So yeah, just kind of taking it slow, matching the pace of the weather. It's rainy here too, so been kind of a slow day in a really nice way. Thanks for asking.
Of course, thank you for sharing. The next part of the beginning of our episodes is where we really like to share a quote that our guests shared with us. So I'm going to do a quick screen share so I can pull up the quote that Miss Wondersmith shared with us, which I think is just so perfect. And the quote says, "It's still magic, even if you know how it's done." So, Miss Wondersmith, would you mind sharing how you decided to select this quote to share with us, and what it is about it that really resonates with you?
Sure, yeah. First of all, Terry Pratchett is just one of my most favorite people slash authors. But what I really love about that quote is that I think that a lot of people have this idea that magic is something that happens to them, or something that they stumble across, or something that they wish for. And for me, I realized, several years ago that you could make your own magic. and that even if you're the person behind the scenes making that magic, it can still be just as fun and rewarding and exciting being that facilitator, that creator, that magic maker, as it is being someone who benefits from that magic being made. So that's kind of what my whole art practice is about. And honestly, I have just as much fun as anybody else does. So yeah, it's a really meaningful quote to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, anybody who is watching this recording, if you're not familiar with the work that Miss Wondersmith does, you need to go see it. Really, like what the art that you create is truly magical, and it's so beautiful to experience and to see. So we're really happy to have you on today. I'll hand it over to Stacey so she can do your more formal introduction. But just had to share that before we continued on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and thank you, Miss Wondersmith, for sharing that quote. Terry Pratchett's also a favorite author. It reminded me of Good Omens, which is such a funny and good book. It ranks up there as one of my favorites. He wrote that with Neil Gaiman. So anyway, thank you so much. But yeah, Miss Wondersmith is an artist and community builder. And her mission in life, and what you'll see with everything she touches, is to cultivate and share wonder. And she does this in all kinds of ways. You'll see in her blog posts, there's beautiful recipes. And one of the things that I love most that she does is she does these magical gatherings where she gathers strangers together to, share a meal and share a ritual and a time together. And invitations for those gatherings are also, sort of found by those people randomly, which is just amazing. And during this pandemic, she's switched gears a bit to also focus her energy on some virtual community building. She has something called the Secret Society of Wonder, which is an online respite from some of the stress that we're facing. And she has the Bunker Games, which I think is so great, a series of fun challenges to encourage creativity that she shares with her patrons, who are people who support the work that she does. She also shares her wonder through a lot of physical artwork. So you'll see, if you saw our promotion for this episode, she has some beautiful cups and a teapot that she's created that looks like sea urchins. She does bead glass work and all sorts of other creative art forms, throughout her day-to-day journey as an artist. So we're really excited to have her here today to talk about this sense of wonder and magic and how to still make time special in this time where, we're navigating some difficulty. So thank you so much for being here, and you can take it away.
Well, thank you both so much for such sweet introductions. Um, yeah, I've had to shift gears a little bit, but yeah, during non-pandemic days, I absolutely love hiding invitations in public places and creating this like ritualized um, experience to share with a bunch of strangers. It's really rewarding, it's really fun, and it can be really meaningful as well. So, um, there are a few things I want to talk about today with you. And rather than giving you specific ideas for how to create um, a special gathering or do a special celebration, instead, I want to share some of the tips that I've learned and the tricks and the structure, so that you're empowered to create your own framework. And that will allow you to create a very specialized experience, and one that's very personalized to you or to whoever you're celebrating, um, and to our new circumstances, because normal like birthday party ideas don't always fit into our stay at home safety model. So um, first, before I dive into sort of the structure of this, I want to emphasize that it's pretty important to take the time to mark occasions even while in isolation. I know that I've definitely been tempted to just kind of ignore the birthdays of my family or holidays. That it's easier to let them go by without doing anything to mark them. But with that, we're denying ourselves something that I think everybody is in need of right now, which is a sense of community, a sense of connection, and a sense of like passing time. I mean, we holidays and celebrations are kind of these benchmarks for time that we can think back and have this sort of snapshot memory of like, oh yeah, I remember what Christmas, 1997 felt like. Maybe not that specifically unless it was like a really awesome Christmas, but um that idea of, being able to look back and think of how you have celebrated during this pandemic. How have you brought your community together? How have you, interacted with friends and family? How have you honored the people that are important to you? And these are going to become memories, and they can be positive memories or sad ones. And I think there's going to be a little bit of both for pretty much everything, because there are a lot of different emotions at this time. So, anyways, I just wanted to really emphasize that don't just let time pass. Um, and the reason I know this is I've actually been pretty much in isolation since October. I had a health emergency, I was hospitalized, and had to have an emergency surgery, and my recovery was really slow. And so it's ironic because just as I was finally starting to feel pretty good, the isolation orders hit my state. So it's like so close. Um, but at first I just let time pass. I felt really depressed. I kind of didn't feel like doing very much. But as I started to find new ways to engage, new ways to adapt to my new normal, and new ways to celebrate everything. I mean, little things, big things, holidays, the beauty of a new bird outside my window. Those are the things that get you through, and those are the things that it's important to focus on. So I will leave you guys to focusing on the cool birds outside your window and talk you through some of the bigger things now. So, when you're planning an event, there are a few specific parts that are really important to pay attention to. The first is having a really clear purpose. The second is having a really clear structure. And then the third is building a framework and setting expectations before the event even begins. So, what I mean by a very clear purpose is you want to have a kind of mission statement for your event or for your ritual. And the more specific you can be, the better. So, one example that's not super applicable right now, but I think about it a lot because I have a lot of friends in the wedding industry. And with weddings, you see a lot of external pressure. There's the way that you're supposed to do it. There's parents getting involved, and wanting to kind of run the show. And so I think there's a huge difference in a wedding for your community or your parents, a wedding as a way to honor your community. And for example, an intimate ceremony that's really just about the couple. And either of those are options, and it's up to you to decide. But make sure that you're clear when you're setting your intention. Who is this for? Why are we doing it? What are our limitations? So if you're, for example, planning a children's birthday party, and this child is an avid reader, but maybe kind of introverted, then having one of the like drive by with lots of signs and sounds, car parades that some parents are doing could be kind of overwhelming, or could, maybe not fit the personality of that child. Whereas maybe having like an extended Zoom session where you pick, a book that's appropriate for that kid's reading level, and everybody takes turns reading it together. And it's just kind of this like evening of hanging out, this long form example. Maybe that's a better fit for, a shy kid who loves to read. So, and this applies also to personal rituals. If you're like, okay, it's the full moon, I'm going to have a full moon ritual. Well, what kind of full moon ritual? What do you want to feel? What do you want to achieve? Is this about self-care? Is this about purely about relaxation? Is it about setting some new goals for yourself? Um, it can incorporate all of those things, but you have to start somewhere. So having that statement, like, this is a birthday party for this specific person, and my goal is that everyone leaves this party feeling uplifted and happy. That is a starting point. And the reason that you need to have that before anything else, before you get on Pinterest looking for theme ideas, before you start brainstorming, creative pandemic celebrations, is because um, that purpose will inform everything. It will inform how many people are invited. It will inform what kind of food is served, or if there is food, or whether or not you have music, if it's um an occasion where you have like excited energetic dance music, or um it's the core of everything. And then if you run into any questions down the line, you can come back to your original statement and you can say, does this fit? So back to the wedding example, if you're like, this is an intimate wedding, um we want to keep it really small and focused on the experience of the bride and groom, then if you think, should I invite my third cousin that I've never met, or a friend I haven't spoken to in 10 years, then you go back to that purpose and say, no, that's not intimate. And that allows you to set those boundaries where you need to. So you can say, oh, I'm only inviting my best friends and my close family members to this. And that's, people are still having ceremonies right now. I don't know if wedding licenses are still obtainable or not, but even if you're having a Zoom wedding, you still want to think about, who is this for? What's the purpose of this? Um, so that kind of just explains why it's important to really consider what kind of ritual, event, experience you're sharing, and what the purpose of it is. So, with that, the second thing to really consider when you're planning something is the structure. And I've kind of noticed something over the years, which is that um, people say that they don't like too much structure, but people really like structure. So I want you to just think to yourself right now. I'm going to pretend you're raising hands because I know there are people out there that can relate to this. But have you ever gone to a party where maybe you only know the host, and you walk in and there's just kind of crowds of people and there's music playing and the host is super distracted, and you don't get introduced to anyone and you feel kind of uncomfortable, or you're not sure where to be, or maybe you have the thought of like, oh my gosh, I need a drink to handle this. And it's kind of, it's uncomfortable, but not in like a fun pushing you outside your comfort zone way. It's uncomfortable in like a, what is happening here? um Whereas if you go to a dinner party and the host is there and they greet you and they introduce you and you sit down, and everybody has some appetizers, um, and some chit chat, and then the conversation grows more detailed or personal as you build up to the main course. And then you have like dessert or coffee as kind of a wind down. I see that structure in a lot of activities, a lot of events, a lot of natural cycles. Even there's this, some kind of introduction that allows you to gain a sense of trust or security, builds up to some kind of climax that can be, exciting or emotional or meaningful in some way. And then there's a kind of a wind down so that you get ready to go back to the world that you came from. So, I can throw a lot of examples out there, and I'm sure a lot of you can think of examples too, but something like going to a concert and having, the first little bit be kind of maybe going out for drinks with your friends beforehand. That's part of that evening's ritual. That's that introduction, that warm up period. And then you go to the concert and the music gradually ramps up until, a couple cover band or like not cover bands, but a couple of um, smaller bands play, and then the headliner comes on stage and everybody's like riled up and excited, and you enjoy that experience so much more because you've kind of been warmed up to it. And then when it's over, you have this sense of completion and this really nice, um, like, okay, I'm ready to like calm down and head home and wind down. And often that part of that ritual for me will happen at home. I'll, sit at home, have a cup of tea, kind of come down off of that awesome concert high, and then go to bed. So, there's the appetizers, the main course, the dessert and wind down. There's the like drink social time, building up to like the main hit song, and then the calming down. So that structure is something that we don't necessarily write into our lives, but it can be seen in so many different things. And especially in, if you're watching a movie or you're reading a book, that is the classic structure of a good story. And I want to show you a little picture. It's going to be backwards, I think, but I'm a very visual person, so I draw a lot of little diagrams. And Joseph Campbell is one of my biggest inspirations. And so he has something called the hero's journey, and I would absolutely recommend looking it up. But it encompasses a lot of the great like ballads and stories in human history, how there's a call to adventure, and then you cross a threshold into the unknown, and then there's like this series of trials, this great final battle, and then this return home. And so whenever I'm planning one of my Miss Wondersmith gatherings, I actually use that structure to kind of consider how the event itself is going to flow and what my role is going to be at different points in that event. And I found that the more vulnerable the gathering is, the more I ask my guests to share really personal information or to really be there for someone else's emotional experience, the more important that structure is. So that's something that's really important to think about when you're planning an event, especially one on Zoom or one that's digital. I mean, we were actually just talking before this officially started about how um, all of us have had Zoom meetings with friends or family where everybody's unmuted and it's just like chaos and you don't know who's talking or what's going on. But if you have like a family gathering on Zoom and you have some kind of structure, including like a specific time for each family member to share something, then everybody is able to listen to that person better. Everybody is able to feel heard when it's their turn. And as the person hosting the meeting, it's your job to facilitate that structure. And in doing so, allow everyone to have the best experience possible. So again, this is kind of just understanding building the framework. So before you begin thinking about themes or activities, you want to have that kind of thesis statement. You want to consider the story structure. You want to think about what happens and when and why does it happen then. And then it's just filling in the details. It's thinking about, okay, um what music or colors or decorations or activities fit this structural framework. Um, and remember too that events start way before somebody logs onto Zoom or walks through a doorway. The call to adventure for any kind of event, virtual or not, is the invitation. It's the first moment you hear about it. So it's really important too to communicate really clearly, what are you doing and why, and what do you expect of your guests? Do you want your guests to show up to a Zoom gathering dressed up? Because if you do, you have to tell them ahead of time so they can prepare and get excited about it. Do you need a commitment? Do you need anybody who's attending a virtual event to be able to say, yeah, I commit an hour to this so that you don't have people popping in and out kind of as needed. Is it important that everybody is on time? That's a big one right now, with the structure of using a virtual gathering space like Zoom. Is it's, awkward if you're in the middle of a conversation and people are still coming in much later. So, you know, making sure your expectations are clear and that your guests have some sort of idea or concept of what you're doing and what it's all about. Um, so, all of those things are really important in terms of creating an experience that's really meaningful for everyone involved. And again, I want to reiterate this doesn't just apply to like, celebrations or gatherings involving other people. If you're feeling run down and you need a night to take care of yourself, you can absolutely design your own ritual. And it can be spiritual, it can be religious, it can be secular. You can use that structure and plug your own beliefs and your own, you know, goals or mission for that evening into that structure. So when I design rituals, and you can find a lot of them on my blog, and a lot of them can be adapted to shelter at home. Uh, I create all of mine in a secular way that leaves space for each individual guest's own spirituality, spirituality or religion, because I want them to be accessible. But if you're designing something for your church group or your group of friends who share really similar spiritual beliefs, you can absolutely incorporate that into your structure. In fact, I've um, heard of some pretty awesome Easter and Passover celebrations over, a virtual platform like Zoom, where there was this beautiful structure and this wonderful storytelling and a way for each family member or, other guests to be involved. So whether you're, starting smaller with something that's just for you or maybe just for your immediate family or whoever you're sheltered in place with, whether that's, a partner, a roommate, a dog, um, or branching out to building community in a different way, it's, that framework is applicable at any scale. And I think that that's a really, it's kind of, it kind of blew my mind when I realized that everything has that structural framework. It's like, oh, now I have the skeleton of how to build something that's really meaningful and really impactful and really special. And all I have to do is kind of work through the process of considering the different stages. So I'm hoping that that understanding that is helpful to you guys as well. Um, I thought if Stacey and Susan are open to it, it could be kind of fun to share any examples that we've seen or experienced ourselves that are um, creative new ways to celebrate something, or a new ritual that might stay as a family tradition even after the pandemic is over and isolation orders are lifted. So I'm curious to hear if anybody has any specific examples. Is it okay if they share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a great idea for people to share if, depending whatever their comfort level is, if, they would like to just type it into the chat, they're welcome to. Um, or, we can try to manage the video and sound situation as well. But yeah, if there's anybody that wants to share any of those ideas, we would love to hear them. I was trying to think of some myself too. I was like, what have we been doing?
I'm
And
Yeah,
just like
well,
looking through the chat right now since I
yeah,
haven't been there yet.
yeah, and it reminds me, So Miss Wondersmith, yesterday we had on somebody who did a smudging activity, or like smudging 101. And after the call ended and we were just having conversation, she said she recently did a sound bath with, bowl meditation bowls for somebody who was about to give birth. And it like blew my mind because I thought, wow, like I've been thinking about how do I do a virtual, I'm due to give birth in a couple weeks. And I thought, how do I do a Zoom baby shower of some sort, because I had to cancel the in-person one, and wasn't sure. And she brought up the sound bath that she did virtually on Zoom. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And as you were talking, it made me think that could certainly be the kind of maybe crescendo part of the Zoom, right? Like you start out, and I think
Yeah.
I might want people sharing some tea, maybe like what's your favorite kind of tea, and dressing up. I was like, oh yes, I totally want people to dress up for this, even though I can't because I can't fit in anything, but they can. Um, and things that just feel nourishing and beautiful at this time and can help celebrate. And so, yeah, so that's, in the works. I'm probably going to plan it, tonight or tomorrow. But for sure, I thought, wow, the sound bath could be amazing. And that could definitely be the ritual that kind of gathers everybody in that space. Um, and yeah, the dressing up. And I even thought, is there maybe like, excerpts from a book or just wisdom each person could share that we could kind of go person by person. So I think that element of structure and ritual is huge. And it's something that you
Mhm.
know, in this time, you kind of forget about it because we have almost no structure to our days in certain ways, in the way the time is flowing. And I think building that in consciously is so important when you're gathering people, especially in a virtual space. So
Oh, absolutely. Um, and one other thing I wanted to mention as well is that when I'm planning a gathering or an event or a ritual or whatever, I think a lot about all five senses. So, typically one of my events will be focused around sharing some kind of, food or beverage. And a lot of our cultural gatherings are focused around food or around a meal. There's Sunday night suppers, there's the wedding cake, there's the birthday cake. Um, there are a lot of situations where food is absolutely the center point to connection. And so being, isolated at home, there are a few ways that you can still think about all of the senses in planning your ritual or your experience. Um, One thing I did recently was I held a virtual tea party for some of my patrons, and I asked that they all prepare a specific treat and tea, and then they could tell us about it. And so we could kind of imagine, like, oh, I bet that would smell really good, or be really descriptive in your taste description so that we can almost taste it. um since the only senses that we are physically able to communicate through right now are the sense of sight and the sense of hearing. You can't do touch, you can't do scent, and you can't do taste. So finding creative ways to incorporate those elements into a virtual experience is definitely important, and I think will make that experience even more memorable. And the other great thing about asking your guests to, get a cup of tea, even, is that that's a preparation. That's like them getting excited to be part of something. And, the more time they invest into the preparation for the event, the more meaningful it's going to be to them. And by extension, the more meaningful it's going to be to everybody else too. It was so awesome to have that tea party. I logged on, and all of my guests had these beautiful tablescapes and had created like baked treats and tea. And one guest even had a whole bunch of like homemade dolls gathered around. It was like a mini tea set, like you would do when you're a little kid, but she'd made all these dolls. And it was just like, oh my gosh, it was so much fun to hear everybody else's description of their setup, of what they were eating, of what they were enjoying. And it made me feel like we were all at this like one big table, and we just happened to be communicating through these screens, but they were right there. Like, you know, there you get this sense of closeness when you find a way to get your guests excited, get your guests engaged, and do that through, you know, incorporating multiple senses. Might be
But
something to think about too.
yeah. And what I love about everything that you just shared is there's a sense of whimsy and play that's really involved with that kind of um, like activity or event, you know, even though it's virtual, like that, you know, bringing in the dolls and doing a tea party and returning to that kind of activity that you might have really enjoyed when you were a child, but giving yourself that permission to do something and enjoy it as an adult. I think that's a beautiful gift that you're providing people with, especially during these times. I love that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are kind of feeling extra nostalgic right now. Um, Partly because, you know, we're scared little kids still. You know, there's a part of all of us that are still, you know, maybe remembering staying homesick as a kid and what that felt like, or um, wishing we could go outside and play, but we can't. So we have to figure out a way to play inside. And um, yeah, I think that that playfulness and that creativity and that opportunity to be a little bit different can be really fun, especially for people who have a very um, ordered and kind of adult lifestyle. You know, you get up, you dress up, you go to your office, you work, you come home, you cook dinner, you go to bed. Um, I think that right now, people who are used to that level of structure might be kind of floundering. Whereas, like, I'm self employed, got chronic illness, like, every day looks different to me. And I actually really love structure. So it's, it can be uncomfortable, but it does allow more time for play and for exploration. But on the flip side, I also just want to touch on the importance of acknowledging emotion. And that's something that I really love about what Susan and Stacey are doing, that you begin your calls by, or your videos by checking in and saying, how are you feeling? Because you know, we're all on kind of a roller coaster ride right now. And that's a totally normal response to something like a pandemic. And there are going to be losses. And so, you know, I think that considering um, how to hold a memorial service, or how to hold a grief circle, or, you know, how to create these spaces where it's safe to talk about emotional subjects that are difficult and painful, it will help everybody feel more supported, feel more connected to do that together. Um, Personally, I've missed several family members' memorial services because of my health issues, and I found that it's really hard to find a sense of closure or work through my grief when I'm doing it by myself while everybody else is doing it together somewhere else. And I've written my own rituals to help me with that process. But you know, this same framework can be applied to memorials. Um, One of my father's college friends lost his partner recently, and he went out and he actually used the book I wrote about designing rituals to create a memorial for this woman that was just extraordinary. And um, they were able to really personalize the experience to be true to her and her personality and what she was like, rather than take some sort of formulaic structure and just plug her name in. And that was like my like proud daughter moment. And it was really meaningful then to hear from his friend. Actually, he reached out to me and said, you know, your dad used something that you've provided, and it, I we would not have known what to do without it. And So I think that, you know, understanding these structures is kind of a superpower, and it can allow you to move through all different kinds of community or solo experiences, the positive, the sad, the everything. Um, but as if you're the host of something, you have a responsibility. It's really important to recognize that hosting a gathering is so much more than just making sure there's food and beverages, or making sure that everybody has a Zoom link, or um, sending out an invitation. You're a guide. You're taking people on some kind of journey, some kind of adventure, and you're their tour guide. I mean, how would you feel if you were taking a tour through the Smithsonian and your guide just like ran away halfway through? It'd be really uncomfortable. That actually happened to me, not at the Smithsonian, but at a different art exhibit. And it was so uncomfortable. It was like, he's just abandoned us. Like, what do we do now? Um, Partly because it was a very bizarre art exhibit. But even, think about like Thanksgiving. What if the family, patriarch or matriarch were to just be like, okay, turkey's in the oven, bye. And, everyone else was kind of like, wait, there's tradition. Like this person always does this. Now what do we do? So, you know, part of hosting a successful event is recognizing that you have a job to do. And that brings us back to that quote I love, that, it's still magic even if you know how it's done. I used to be really intimidated at the thought of having to be that guide, of like, do I have to have like a lot of gravitas? Do I have to like be intimidating or like, you know, bigger than myself in order to capture people's attention and to lead them in a meaningful way? And the answer is no, absolutely not. You don't need to be anything but yourself. You just need to recognize that that's something you need to do and to be. So remember to hold that power in yourself. And if you're having, if you're trying to organize a Zoom family reunion, and you're the one who organizes it, it's got to be you that then says, okay, this is what we're doing, this is our activity, this is how we're going to hear from everybody and get an update. We're going to be taking turns, or you know after one person talks, they're going to say the name of someone else, or however you choose to structure it. It's your job to steer it, I guess. Oh.
I love that. You can see me laughing a lot over here. I don't know. Susan's probably watching, but yeah, the Smithsonian example, especially, like, yes, like a ritual or setting up this structure and a tour guide mentality, I think is so, so important. And we have a couple people chiming in on Zoom that we can share here. So Zia says she's still processing. I am too, Zia. There's so much good stuff to think about. And Kristen says, I was very active in a weekly cooking group and so missed my weekly get-togethers and suggested that they do it on Zoom. So now there's one person who decides the recipe, sends a list of ingredients, prep is given the night before. We start at 11:30 and we learn new cooking techniques and have a wonderful time. It's
I
an
love
hour
that.
or touchstone to my week. Yeah, I think that's so great.
And using the same recipe, that's a great way to kind of get everybody on the same page and to see individual, expression. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And Susan and I were talking too, like on your element of this is about celebrations, but it's also sometimes about grief rituals you might need to have, and we're organizing something for next weekend for pregnant and postpartum women who will just have a space to gather and talk about some of the grief, but also sort of start the session and end the session with a ritual of some sort,
Mm-hmm.
particularly ended on a note of hope and a ceremony that kind of allows them to, as you said in the beginning, still celebrate, still, honor that this is a special moment and they're bringing life into the world. And so, yeah, so that element again of structure that you keep threading throughout is, I think, paramount to that. Yeah. So thank you for sharing all of that.
You're welcome.
I'm wondering, Miss Wondersmith, if you mentioned the tea gathering, which was awesome to hear about. Have there been any other virtual gatherings you've done or you've been a part of over the past, I guess we're in this, what, a month and a half, um, that have been particularly impactful for you or that have really resonated with you?
Yeah, it's actually really kind of a treat sometimes when someone else organizes something and I can just show up as a guest. I mean, being the host is still very magical, don't get me wrong, but yeah, a friend of mine invited me to a virtual gathering of women, and I didn't really know totally what to expect going into it, but I trusted my friend and knew that she would only invite me to really cool things. And it ended up being this absolutely beautiful experience. We played this game where the host, whose name is Katrina, and I can send more information if you want to put that in the show notes too. But she would pick two random questions and ask someone those two questions, and that person would answer, however they wanted to, their natural answer. And everybody else was supposed to really pay attention to how they answered and, pay attention to body language, pay attention to what words they used, what they emphasized. And then we went around and we each shared what we thought that person's superpower was based on the way they answered the question. So it was actually really amazing because I only knew, my friend that had invited me, and there was another woman there that I've briefly met before, but don't have a very close relationship with. And I mean, there was so much crying, but it was so much good crying because it was like, oh my gosh, people can really see like who I am and what I stand for from two random questions. I mean, and that's what everybody in that group seemed to be saying was like, wow, I was so insecure about this part of myself and you guys like picked it up right away and loved it just from the way I answered this one thing. And I thought that was really beautiful. um I, by the end of our session, I felt very like intimately connected with all of the other women, even though going into it, we were complete strangers. So again, there was a lot of structure. There was a guide that walked us through everything. There was like everybody had their turn. Um, so a lot of those things that I'm talking about were applied in a really wonderful way that left room for a lot of vulnerability, and therefore a lot of connection. So that's one example that I've had that was pretty awesome.
I would love to do that. I have like so many questions and ideas like running through my head now. I'm like, what were the questions? How long did you talk? Like, how are the questions determined? I've again so many questions because the idea just really excites me. So, if there's any of that that you can share, I'd be thrilled to hear about it.
Yeah, so the questions weren't like intensely personal. Um, I think she had a website that was like a random question generator or like a conversation topic generator. I've had I think I have somewhere like a deck of cards that has that. That's just conversation starters. So they were pretty, some of the questions are really big, like um how would you solve world hunger? Like no pressure or anything. And then some were like, what was your favorite movie when you were a kid? So it really varied. And it was interesting because some of us got like two of the more like first date kind of questions, like what was your favorite movie? What's your favorite food? And even just answering those questions, people could still really get a read on who we were as a person. And then there were some people who got two of the like heavy duty questions and just kind of dove right in. And, we got a sense for them as well, but we got a sense of their lighter side from the way that they answered those heavy questions. So I thought that was super interesting that they really were like really random questions that weren't catered to any of us specifically, um, but ended up being really insightful. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the fact that there were the different styles of questions. You know, there were the lighter ones and balanced out with the deeper questions, because I think when I was envisioning it, it was more just in the like the deeper, more difficult questions to answer. Um, but I love that you're still able to get all of that insight no matter what the question was asking. We actually had a question pop up in the chat about this activity or this event that you participated in. And it's from Suzanne. She says, I wonder if the deeper questions are easier to answer in a Zoom format versus live. Like, what do you think about that?
That's a really interesting question.
Mm.
For me personally, they're probably easier to answer in text because I like to be able to think about it and like reread it. But I had one of the intense questions and I just kind of went for it. And it was, yeah, I think it was interesting to be able to share it kind of right on the spot. Um, but I've also had conversations where someone asks a question like that in real life that I've enjoyed as well. So I think it just sort of depends on your conversation style and what your comfort zone looks like. I'm an introvert, so I tend to really like those kind of questions as opposed to small talk. And so I like Zoom meetings where we really dive in deep to that stuff rather than like kind of a more casual get together where I'm, overwhelmed by 12 people trying to have 12 different conversations at once. And same with parties, like can be overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I definitely prefer the deeper conversations than the more like small talk style. Which is, I think, another reason why this format, this show appeals to me so much, because we end up going into just creative things and joyful things, but it's beyond that surface level with everybody that shows up. Um,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I always joke that I'm the person in the room that if I have one good deep conversation for like a 3 hour party, I'm good. I can go home a happy woman. Um, Zia says that she's loving the stories and the structure pieces we've talked about, and she's realizing she's been using these elements in other areas without even being aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we probably all do because that structure is so ingrained in what it means to be human. We gravitate towards it and create it without even thinking about it. But when we can consciously create with it in mind, then we, can be even more powerful and dynamic. So yeah, I'm not at all surprised that um I was doing it subconsciously for a long time too. And I still do it subconsciously all the time. But when I'm, specifically designing an event, I try to be more um, studious or focused about it, I guess. Um, yeah.
so Miss Wondersmith, we were thrilled to have you on today. Do you have any like final thoughts or parting words for everybody before we wrap up today?
Oh gosh. Well, first, thank you so much, Susan and Stacey. This was really a wonderful thing to be part of. It was fun to brainstorm what I was going to talk about and um, think about what are people looking for right now. And I think if I leave you with anything, it's just to remember that this is an incredible opportunity for redefining tradition. Um, this is a chance to put some thought into the way that you mark occasions, the way that you take care of yourself, the way that you celebrate the people who might be in isolation with you, and to create something that is really meaningful and impactful. And maybe you'll keep around even after the pandemic is over and life more or less returns back to normal. Thanks again for having me.
It's been so good to have you. And Could you let people know, it's, I already see some of these coming up in the chat of like, how do we stay connected? Can you let people know the best ways to reach you? And I know you mentioned a book that you have. If you want to share that, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I actually wrote this book called Fairy Tale Gatherings, and it dives much deeper into the sort of structure of like an adventure or a journey through book form. So it's that framework that can empower you to create those really specialized events. And I'll send Stacey and Susan links. It is on Amazon, but you have to search Fairy Tale Gatherings as one word. You put the space in there, you won't find it. But I also have digital download on my website, which is thewondersmith.com. And if you just click the tab that says Book Emporium, that'll take you to a page about it. You can read more about the book, see some excerpts, and you can download it there. And I believe it's set up to download a free PDF kind of worksheet for you to work through for when you're planning something so that you can make sure you get all the different steps planned out. I'm pretty active on social media. You can find me on Instagram. My Instagram name is Miss Wondersmith. On Facebook, I'm the Wondersmith. And all of my work is supported by my patrons. So all of the events that I share, all of the content I share, um, everything I do basically is thanks to the support of people who believe in sharing wonder in the world. So, some of my major focuses lately have been giving my patrons a little extra thank you for supporting me during this tough period. To learn more about that, you can go to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/the Wondersmith. And you can see, what that's about, what you're supporting. It's really important to me that my work be as accessible as possible, which is why I like to keep as much of it as I can free. So having this business built on trust and generosity fits my personal ethos really well. I love that I'm supported by people who love what I'm doing enough to, share what they can with the understanding that other people are still going to benefit from that, even if they can't afford to share. So, um, those are those are the main things. You can always email me with questions as well. Misswondersmith@gmail.com is my email address. And if you've had other, interesting gatherings, I would love to hear about them. Any questions, all of that. So, yeah, I'm pretty easy to track down.
Thank you so, so very much for everything that you shared with us today, Ms. Wondersmith. This was really amazing. And I mean, I'm just looking forward to diving into your website and all of your content even further to just become an even bigger fan. And already thinking, like, my sister's going to really love the book. Like, who else going to get that for? Because I'm just so thrilled with everything that you do. So thank you for that. And thank you for being on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. My heart is sort of warm, and the way it gets warm when you have like a good meal or, a gathering. So this has been beautiful. And I did in the chat put in some of the things that Miss Wondersmith mentioned as ways to stay connected to her, but we will on the website and on the YouTube channel have it in the show notes and episode pages. So you'll be able to link up to everything that she's mentioned. So thank you so much, Miss Wondersmith, and everybody who has been here. And we always end our call with a Mary Oliver quote. It's from one of her poems called The Summer Day. And the quote is, "What will you do with your one wild and precious life?" So how will you create magic in that precious life in the coming days? So thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.